Hello, and welcome to True Horrors with Meg and Rachel. Every week we discuss a horror film and the true stories that inspired, influenced, or bear striking resemblance to them. Be warned for spoilers and adult themes. I'm Rachel.
And I'm Meg.
This is True Horrors.
Hello, welcome everyone.
Oh, thank God Meg's here and she knows how to do things, because otherwise it would just be a mess from start to finish.
I hope that you guys in the future are all having a great week. I hope that you enjoyed watching The Blob, or have at some point in your life enjoyed it, or are just going to enjoy listening to us talk about it without ever having watched it. Maybe you've read the Wikipedia summary.
I mean, I don't know if it's possible to watch this movie and not enjoy it. It's I had never seen it before last night, but it's my favorite movie now.
All right, that's a strong opening. Please continue.
I have a question for you before we delve into like some of the meatier bits. How did you feel about the theme song, Meg?
Wow, loaded question. Well, I'd also never seen The Blob. I almost called it The Blog. The Blob. And so when it started rolling and it started singing about it, I was kind of confused because I was like, I had a lot of feelings. First, I was like, is this a real horror movie? Yes. Like, I've always known this is supposed to be like a drive-through, like really scary movie. But this song is very happy. And then I was like, maybe it's kind of like the 1-2 Freddy's Gonna Get You. Like, it's supposed to be sinister. But then it was kind of more informative. And then it got me thinking, do all 1950s movies have songs like this? And I just don't watch enough movies from the 1950s.
I don't know. I hope so. So I knew this movie had a theme song because back in 2015, when I decided to make a Halloween playlist, this is one of the first songs I found. This has been my alarm, because when it hits October, I'll change my alarms to my spooky, or not really that spooky, Halloween songs, and that's been my alarm so many times in the past 4.5 years. But when it started, amazing. I was still, I transcended. I was so happy.
Well, there's a point, not to jump too far ahead, when the doctor locks himself in his office, and I'm like, it's going to go through the door. The theme song explained that to us.
You know, what's funny is I was waiting for it to go all around the walls, and it never did.
No, it sort of went all around the window.
Yeah.
In the end.
Yeah. I mean, it like kind of like went over top of a building, but like I was expecting it to go vertically up some walls the way the theme song promised. But one of the things I genuinely loved about this movie is that it seems like creature features haven't changed even a tiny bit in the past 60 years, because it was 1958. This was basically the same movie as like any of those crazy shark movies that we watch now, except those movies have a little bit of Jaws thrown into them, so there's like a blending there. But like your generic creature feature follows the same formula that this movie followed, which is teenagers or young people find a monster, tell an authority figure, they don't believe them, the teens have to figure it out. Again, like the main thing that's changed is that Jaws has added, like, or I guess it's really more Jaws and Jurassic Park have added some archetypes. Also this is created by science kind of thing.
I would also say that if we're thinking of this as maybe like the father of those creature feature movies, like at least one of them, I think you can almost see that some of those other ones are almost parodying this, because there were some things I thought was really interesting with, like, if this movie was made today, which I have some thoughts on that also, which we'll get to when we talk about it more. But if this movie was made today, like the fact that he's like drag racing with those guys, and then when he almost gets stuck by the cops, they're like, oh my God, bro, wasn't that crazy? And I'm like, are you guys all really friends? Like, has this all been a joke? But it was like this level of camaraderie, of like small town camaraderie, where it's like, there are so many times in creature movies where like the opposite friend group, like opposite gangs, it's like, you know, it's like they have all this animosity towards each other. Whereas them, it was like, ooh, let's race. And then when they almost got caught, it's like, oh, the cops are the real ones who we gotta like, like, hey, want to come to the movies with us? Like, and I thought that was so good and so funny that it was like, it was almost like it was all put on and then they almost got in trouble. And it was like, oh, dude, like, as opposed to when they were waiting for them, I'm like, what, are they going to try to murder him now? Because if this took place in the 80s, they would.
I was really worried.
There's also, I don't know. I guess I feel like so separate from the 1950s that there were some things in this movie that I was like, wow, like this is the Dark Ages. And then there were some things in this movie where I was like, oh, that's funny. So it really hasn't changed that much. Like when he was like pedal to the metal to get that guy to the doctor, did you see how fast he was going? Yes. It was 55.
Which, to be honest, was faster than I thought he was gonna go. Like,
well, and that is how fast he was going. And those guys thought he wanted to drag race. Like, the person going 55 in front of me, I'm like, move it. It's a 60. And I loved that. I loved his car.
Yes.
And I loved her dresses. Like, that aesthetic, I was like, ooh, bring that back. Like, I love that.
I mean, again, I loved all of it. Also the grocery, like literally every single like piece of costuming or set I loved because that's my thing. All that wood paneling in the, like, the office of the grocery store. Oh my God. Just the best.
I have to say that I wasn't really sure about his characterization. Like, it was very odd to me. Like, when it started, I was like, are you an asshole? Like, why did you bring her here? And then they have this weird back and forth that seems almost improvised about like he came here to bring shooting stars and she's like, is that a line? And he's like, no, like it genuinely isn't. And then as the movie progresses, I'm like, okay, Steve is like the hero and he doesn't seem to be a jerk. But like that beginning scene I felt like really set us up for like them being attacked by the creature, that they wouldn't be the main couple because it seemed like he was trying to like do something up there, you know? And then, like, I felt like his characterization really changed to be kind of the, like, oh, my son doesn't lie, like, noble kid. And I was like, then what was with that opening scene? Because I really didn't know how to feel. Like, they didn't lay it on thick enough where I would be like, oh, sweet angel, he really brought her here to see shooting stars. And she thinks it's something else. Like, that's funny. Like, I really wasn't sure either. I was just as confused as she was.
I did not know what they were trying to tell me with that. And it kind of felt like they didn't know what they were trying to tell us either. But also, speaking of Jane, she is the secret hero of this movie. I love her so much. Yes, she does have that one weird scene where she gets hysterical because it's 1958. But for the most part, like, she doesn't talk a lot. But when she does, she says great things.
Are you talking about the greatest line in this whole movie?
I assume so. Why don't you tell it?
When that sergeant is being an asshole and says that they're trying to make him look stupid, and she says, I think you're doing that pretty well all by yourself, Sergeant. And I out loud went, damn, Jane. Damn. Like, my thought was, I didn't know you were allowed to talk that way on screen as a woman to an authority figure, but she just like, the chief thought it was hilarious. Like, the chief was like, LOL, she told you. And I was like, oh, okay. Like, the best line in the whole thing. I was like, that's what they mean when they say their 50s heroines were spunky. Like, it was so that I assume that's what you were talking about because it is the greatest line in this movie.
But like also at that point where like, since nobody believes Steve, he's starting to doubt himself, despite the fact that like he has seen it. And I mean, Jane saw it too, to an extent. She didn't see it eat the doctor. But, like, he's starting to, like, think it didn't happen. And she's like, no, I know you. I believe you. Like, if you say you saw it. Let's go find it and prove it. Like, hero.
There's some other bits in the beginning I just want to talk about. I want to talk about the fact that they call it a skyrocket.
I forgot about that. A skyrocket. Speaking of hilarious things they say, when they're talking about that movie that they're going to go to, he refers to it as a midnight spook vid.
It's a spook show.
Well, yes, he calls it a spook show too, but at one point he says midnight spook vid. And I think it's really important that you know that's the new name of our podcast.
Oh, great.
So you know.
You can find us. You can find us at Midnight Spook Show, people.
Midnight spook vid.
Oh, they're both great names for a podcast.
They are.
Also for a band.
Yes. Just for the record, that's the joke I was laughing at the beginning. I'm really pleased with myself.
Her joke was so good, we changed the name of our podcast. Also, was he planning on telling anyone? That's one thing, is that he takes this old man who at that point has something on his hand to the doctor. And the doctor is like, okay, please go back and look and see if he has family or witnesses or whatever. And then when he meets his drag racing friends and when he meets Dave, he doesn't say anything. And I thought that was so odd not to be like, hey, we found this old man and he was hurt. We took him to the doc and now the doc's asked us to go do this. Like, it was very odd because at that point they weren't really in monster territory. So it didn't really make sense that he was keeping it so close to the vest. So I thought that was weird.
He forgot about it. So after Dave leaves, the cop leaves, he goes, oh, that's right. We have to go find that old man's family. So it's like, he walked out of the building and immediately forgot about it because drag racing, I guess, is just that exciting.
You're exactly right. You know, when they had the 3 cops and the one who plays chess on the radio was someone who I don't think we ever figured out who he's playing with.
He works in a different town. He also works the night shift.
Okay. When he said that he was going to teach him chess, I was like, you're clearly going to die before you teach anyone chess. But then he didn't. But that, again, was something that would have been a beacon to be like if you make any kind of future plans in a horror movie, you're not going to be around to do it.
Also, his chess skills never come. I guess we're meant to realize he's not very good at chess. Like, I think he loses because he's very upset and they pan down to the chessboard. Like, everyone in the audience is going to know what that means just by looking at it, which... It seems like every single piece, I don't know, maybe I didn't look at it that closely. Maybe I was just like too taken aback by the fact that they thought I was going to understand what was happening. Maybe it was really obvious what was happening on that chessboard, but I assume he lost.
Yes, and I agree with you that I thought, that's why I thought he was going to die, because it didn't really come back into play. Like, it's not like he uses chess moves to defeat the Blob or something.
That's the Blob's weakness, is chess. He uses the same opening move every single time, and it's just really predictable.
I would just like to say this is the kind of horror movie where a half lie will get you there, and I don't know why anyone doesn't do it. Because you don't have to say to the cops or to everyone, there is a monster or that something came from space. You can say there was some kind of parasite that the doctor was taking and the parasite got the doctor. Right. And then at least you're partially in the realm of reality. And then once they see it, you can be like, well, I knew you weren't going to believe me, you know? But it's so weird to me. This happens a lot in horror where I'm like, a well-placed half lie or like omitting some detail would make your story more credible. And then people would be able to like latch onto it more. That's like a big plot point in the 2nd season of Stranger Things, is taking the story with like all of its like weird like sci-fi stuff and being like, hey, the public is not going to react well to that. But if we just tell this part of it, they will, you know?
I didn't really get the impression that any of these teenagers were very good at thinking through that kind of thing.
Also, though, it seems like, I don't know 1950s cinema that much, but there were a lot of things that happen in this movie that could just lift right out, that don't seem to matter. Like the chess, or like that woman who, I understand she serves a plot point of saying that the doctor went out of town, but that could have been a phone call, not her coming in trying to destroy the crime scene so that it doesn't seem messy.
Which, okay, there was a moment that really bothered me. because they try to get her out because they're like, we don't want you touching things because we have to dust for fingerprints. As if they haven't just marched through this and started manhandling the gun. Like, they're the police. They should know better. We've had fingerprinting technology for well over 100 years.
They're the police of Blobtown now. You're the mayor of Blobtown.
The Blob needs no police. The Blob is its own police.
Also, it was weirdly inappropriate, I feel like, to have the other cops just drop on us that the reason Jim is like this is because a teenager murdered his wife.
I literally wrote in my notes, hello, surprise and cursory tragic backstory. Like, what the hell was that? Also, the fact that he's like, teenagers hate me because they heard about my war record. I'm like, did kill a lot of teenagers in the war? Is that why they have it? Like, I do not understand what that means.
I don't either because of the period of time. So it's not like being a war hero and fighting in the war he must have fought in was, there wasn't any controversy surrounding it. So the idea that like, oh, those teenagers, like maybe in like the 60s or that kind of, or like the 70s, again, not that there'd be a reason to,
right,
but for a reason for someone to think that, like, I'm like, the war you fought in was, I mean, maybe Korea. I don't really know.
I was going to say, it could potentially be Korea.
It also felt like it gave him a mix of motives because the idea of his wife was killed by a teenager, so he hates kids. That's more than enough for me to be like, why is he acting unreasonable? Yes. And the idea of why he gets so pissed off when they say they're just kids, because clearly that kid was either drunk or not paying attention. So, but then to add in this weird paranoia he has that all the teens are against him, kind of undercut it.
I mean, they kind of are against him, but it's because he's an asshole.
One of my other favorite lines in this was, did we just waste our 80 cents for how much the movie cost?
Yes. Did you see how much the watermelons cost?
No, how much?
They were, I didn't write it down. I think they were like 4 cents a pound.
Oh my God. So much watermelon.
So much watermelon.
Also, I think we need to give Steve a real... It's Steve, right? Steve. Or is that the actor's name?
Both.
Okay.
It's Steve McQueen playing a character named Steve.
But he just jumped on that grocery store shelf to try to get to and save her.
Oh my God. He almost went over it in a single bound.
I thought he was trying to push it over onto the blob, and then he jumped on it. And I was like, oh, okay. My bad.
God. Because, like, the thing is, we can see that the shelves are taller than they are. Like, it's not like it's a tiny, like, half shelf.
Also, little Danny wants to stand guard.
Little Danny, who was clearly played by a 10-year-old.
Yes.
Which, I was playing this fun game by myself. Because, like, Steve McQueen was 28 when this movie came out. And he's playing someone who is at most 17 years old. And he doesn't even remotely pass for a 17-year-old. So every time anyone came on screen, I made a joke about how they were like decades younger. Like that old man, I was like, I assume he's like 26. But Danny is very clearly like a 10-year-old.
And I just don't know why was there a shortage of children? Could they not have just made him 10? I guess like his actions are a little stupid for 10, but like, yeah, there was just a lot there.
So I think it's also just a function of people not really knowing how children speak, because like, I don't know, but he was wearing pajamas with feet, which makes me think he had to be like no older than 6. But the way he talked made it seem like he was going for like 4 years old. Like,
yes,
it was so weird.
Well, last week we did The Conjuring, and something I didn't mention then, but it made me think of it with this one, is that the people who made The Conjuring had clearly met children before.
Yes.
Whereas whoever did the blog had never met a child.
You called it the blog again.
How often do I say the word blog and how often do I say the word blob in real life? My mind is autocorrecting like a phone. Like, clearly you meant blog. Okay, I'm sure you have more, but I just want to get to my end thing.
Okay.
I know this movie was made in 1958.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end, when they say, as long as the Arctic stays cold, I was like, sequel, sequel, sequel. Like, who owns the rights to the blog? And why are they not immediately making a blog?
You just...
Do you own it?
You just said blog, called it blog the third time. I'm just going to keep count here.
I'm not meaning to. Who owns the blob with a B? 2 B's, in fact. Who owns the blob? And why aren't they making one about the fact? And it would be a direct sequel. Like, you could even use their voiceovers from that movie. It would be a direct sequel. You could have people playing so-and-so's granddaughter or whatever. And that now that we have global warming, the Arctic is no longer cold enough. And you probably have people who think that's an old wives' tale at this point, and like da-da-da. And then the blob just comes out. Like, how is that movie? I literally Googled it because I was like, this has to be in the works. I can't be the only person who's thought of this.
Right.
But if I am, rights reserved.
Yeah, for real. Yes, I actually have written right here, global warming has given this movie a very ironic ending. Also, I really want to talk about how extremely conniving this blob is. Because at first, especially, it exclusively goes for people who are not going to be missed. Like, how does it know? It's a blob. But, like, it goes straight for the people who are about to go out of town. Then it goes for all the people who are at a bar, which, I don't know, it's made in 1958, so I think we're assuming that those are the people who don't have anyone to go home to. But then it just goes for everyone in the town, so...
Well, also that bar scene was really interesting because when all the teens, who again, these teens that were kind of their like joke enemies for 5 minutes, agree to like go out and be like, let's warn people. When they go to that second bar, clearly someone escaped and told those people, and he was laughed out.
Right.
So like, I thought that was really an interesting line to put in considering we don't meet them. Also, we definitely didn't get the point where Dave got to be like, hey, Jim, so what about those kids? What about those kids just messing around? Hey, why don't you go touch it? Go touch it. He was a good boss. Dave was a good boss. He wouldn't do that, but I thought it was funny. I would have. I would have been like, wow. Or why does the school need 20 fire extinguishers?
It's a big school. It's got 20 bedrooms. That's a joke from last episode. I just realized those are two different episodes. There's like a whole week for everyone else listening, but...
It's like an Easter egg. I don't really know the rules about how much square footage you need to then have a fire extinguisher, but most apartments I've ever lived in have like one. Mm-hmm. But he had 20. And then I really like how he was looking for the key and then he broke open the door. I'm like, your children are about to die. Like, go faster.
I know, for real. Also, for a movie so incredibly hokey, it has a couple of really dark moments that I was not expecting. Like when there's like a 2-3 minute period where you think they brought that dog back just to kill it.
Yeah.
I was very upset. But then also at the very end, when those two teenagers with the 10-year-old playing a 4-year-old and then the two other people we don't care about stoically face their impending deaths.
Yes. I was like, this is a real turn for this movie. Because I have to wonder if it was seen as campy at the time. I don't really know if it was, or if it was genuinely like scary, or if it was like a B scary movie to them. Like, I don't really know. But I do have to say that was really her basically telling Danny to close his eyes and go to sleep before he died. And then the eye contact they were making, I was just like, yikes. I was like, this can't possibly end this way. Like, they don't die.
There was a moment when I was like, I legitimately was like, are they gonna die? Are they gonna kill these teenagers? Like, I don't really know the beats from 1950s horror. Like, maybe they're gonna kill these teenagers.
I feel like the only reason I didn't think they were gonna kill them is because you had that thing there that we as an audience knew, which was that reacts to cold, and he hadn't had a chance to share that yet. So like, that was the only reason that I was like, he can't die, because how else are they going to know that cold is what does it. And he still hadn't told them yet. If he'd already told someone, I maybe would have thought it more. But the only things I really knew about this movie was that the Blob
You did it.
doesn't like cold, and the movie theater scene, which did not disappoint.
How big was that movie theater? Like 1,000 people came out of that theater. They just kept
How big
coming.
is that town? And so many people were already in the street from them honking their horns. How big is this town?
And
why does
bunch
it
of
have
them-
more than 3 police officers then?
But also a bunch of them had been eaten. Like
40 to
people
50.
had already been eaten. Like, oh my God. Yeah, honestly, the only thing I knew about this movie going in was the theme song and that you need to beware of the blob. I'm not
I
gonna.
mean, it's good advice.
I'm not gonna sing the whole theme song, although I was tempted. Well, I was gonna speak it, but
I was going to say we're just going to speak it, just keep saying lines from it.
yes, I was.
A classic move. I don't really know on our scale. I really don't know if I'd survive the blob.
I know.
It doesn't really take a lot of skill to die from the blob.
Yeah, because it doesn't move very quickly. But so like the way it gets most people is they're not paying attention, or I guess the doctor got trapped. Which, okay, actually, before I continue on this, I just need to take 1 second to hop over to that scene where the doctor and the nurse try to kill it, and the nurse throws acid on it and it doesn't work, and she goes, "Nothing will stop it." Like, bitch, you tried one thing.
I've tried the thing. Also, I don't know why she doesn't, like, not trying to, like, victim blame or whatever. She was in front of a blob. But I just feel like, again, another case where someone should have run for it. Like, because she ends up tripping over the lamp, and I think that's how it gets her. But you're right, it doesn't move that fast. And so, but I just love the ideas, like, throwing knives at it and shooting it and stuff. And I'm like, you can't possibly think that was going to work. Like, at least electrocuting it made some kind of sense.
Right.
It's also interesting that it seems to be able to eat people more quickly the bigger it gets.
Well, I kind of assume that it's like a jellyfish, where it's like once it gets around you, its digestive, acids just kind of start working. So if it's bigger, it's going to have more surface area with the digestive acids and stuff like that. Yeah.
That makes sense. I like having a villain that is pretty neutral.
Right.
Like the blob doesn't mean to do these things. It's just eating.
I don't know. It goes for the people who aren't going to be missed.
I think that's more circumstantial. Rachel's more for the serial killer blob. I'm more from the act of nature blob.
Maybe just a little bit of both.
There was also a lot of funny things they said when they were around that crater that were like Skyrocket was definitely my favorite, but they definitely said something about it like hurtling through like something where everything they said was just golden. It was just people who had never who didn't have a real realm of knowledge for space travel because of the time.
Well, yeah. I was going to say Sputnik hadn't even been launched yet.
No.
Or wait.
57.
Yeah. Yes, it had.
That's how they knew what a space rocket was. Also, I can't believe how they were just throwing that thing around. If I had an actual piece, I'd be like, bitch, I'm not giving this to you. It's mine.
This is my meteorite.
And I'm just going to yoink, put it in my pocket. But yeah, I mean, I guess I could be surprised by the blob if I'm laying in bed, because it seems like once it gets you, you're screwed.
Yes.
Like you would have to amputate right away. And that's only when it's smaller. Right. So I guess it could sneak up on me. It could sneak up on me when I'm listening to music or when I'm like, just laying in bed or whatever. It could come through the pipes. I feel like if it trapped me it could also trap me. So I'm going to give it a 50-50 shot. I'm going to say like a 5.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking 4 or 5.
Because they never really show, I would have to know it doesn't like cold, but they never really show anyone else beating it other than chance. All right. You going to tell me a story, Rachie?
I'm going to tell you many stories. Actually, not that many stories. So, in September of 1950, in Philadelphia, around 10 p.m. one night, officers John Collins and Joseph Keenan were out patrolling, and they saw something parachuting down to Earth. When they first saw it, it was at about tree tops. And they said it was about 6 feet in diameter. So they called for backup. And when Sergeant Joseph Cook and Officer James Casper arrived, they went into the field that it had landed in and saw this purple blob that was glowing and maybe had some crystals in it. And Officer Collins tried to pick it up, but it dissolved. So the 4 officers just stood there and watched it dissolve for the next 25 minutes. And when it was gone, there was no trace of anything, not even a dent in the grass. So they called the FBI, but they were like, we don't have any evidence this thing happened, but we're sending it to someone higher up. This is the direct inspiration for the movie The Blob. But it's not the only story about what some people call star jelly.
Am I just supposed to let that go? Am I just supposed to let you say that and just put that into the universe of all of our listeners' ears and just move on? Unchallenged.
I mean, what would you like to say, Meg?
I don't like it. I'm unhappy with that. I'm unhappy with the term star jelly.
It has a couple of other names, but I didn't write them down. Because the thing about this story is that we are verging on conspiracy theory territory. So I have a few other stories about this, but I found them on like random websites that I can't they don't source their information. So I can't find primary sources, which is a lot of what I used for this because it's so weird. I've went and found actual newspaper articles about these things happening, but we'll unpack it at the end. Apparently, there's even a story going back to 1846 about some weird thing, Are you okay? You're just looking around.
I have my back porch shades open for more direct sunlight, but also it's very windy, and so I have a tarp out there that just keeps going back and forth. Okay. And it's out of the corner of my eye. I'm ready. I'm on it. Star jelly.
I didn't know if maybe a blob was coming for you. But apparently there was an article in Scientific American in 1846 about something similar to this. But Scientific American won't let me read it. So I only have the word of conspiracy theorist that article exists. Actually, would you like to hear something equally unpleasant?
Yeah, I guess.
The article that I believe is the one about it is titled A Traveling Pus. God, I wish everyone else could see your face right now.
I just feel like we're too liberal with letting people name things. I feel like there has to be some kind of democratic process to name things. Otherwise, the name's just out there. I very briefly looked up other names for this, and astral jelly, I like that a little bit more. It has a certain sense of science-y nature.
I don't know. I think astral jelly kind of sounds like a lubricant.
Yeah. I just think it's the word jelly. What about Jell-O? Space Jell-O.
Jell-O. Well, because it's not really, from my understanding, it's not really Jell-O texture. It's more it is gelatinous, but it's more like a jelly. It's like a blob.
I don't like that one bit. And I feel like when it got bigger, it kind of had a Jell-O consistency.
Touche.
It was a little bit more solid, I feel like, when it got moving.
All right, that's fair.
All right.
Well,
okay. So what you're telling me is you're about to tell me a bunch of black hole space jelly theory.
No, I'm just going to tell you a couple of other incidents. Not a bunch. I only have 3 more. But these are the big ones. The 1846 one was in Lowville, New York, by the way. Can't find any evidence it ever happened. It also quickly disappeared. In August of 1979 in Frisco, Texas, which is a suburb of Dallas-Fort Worth, and also Dallas won't let you just read their newspaper archives unless you live in the city. I'm not bitter. Sybil Christian went out onto her lawn one morning and saw several purple blobs just hanging out. And I don't know if you know this, but early August is the same time as the Perseid meteor shower. So people think that's significant. But in August again of 1994, in Oakville, Washington, all right, get ready because this one's the worst one. It started raining this weird, mysterious goo. And this was actually featured on Unsolved Mysteries. So that's where my information for this one comes from. So it happened 6 times over a 3-week period. And around the same time, there was this weird outbreak of a bunch of different illnesses. They sent a sample of it to someone at the hospital. And at the hospital, they found it contained human white blood cells, which I don't like at all. And apparently another sample was sent to the Washington State Department of Health, and they found 2 different species of bacteria in it. And one of those species is actually found in the human intestines. Also, during this, apparently someone kept a sample in their freezer, which I want you to really think about, because after 2 years of keeping this weird goo that rained down from the sky in their freezer, they sent it to Amtest Labs to see what was going on with it. And I just want you to think about that, because that's, that's where you keep your food. The goo is in there with your food. When they test, do you have something to add?
I more want to know what that thought process was. Is it like, they kept meaning to send it, but it's like whenever there's something on your to-do list that just keeps going, and then it's like, then you're kind of embarrassed it's been so long. It's like when you haven't texted someone back and you're like, it's been, is it ruder for me to send it now? Should I wait? And then finally it's like, oh, screw it. It's just taking up space. Like, what were they planning for those 2 years?
I don't know. I think that person was interviewed on Unsolved Mysteries, but I kind of skimmed over the parts where people were telling their experiences and went for the facts. So I think it might have been someone who had been sick during that time period, but Amtest Labs tested it and found that it contained cells that contain a nucleus, which Unsolved Mysteries then goes in a very dramatic fashion to say, so that means the goo was alive. This is something that's really hard to go back and test, because all the samples that were sent to the state and the records of those samples have since disappeared.
I don't like that one bit. What year was that?
No. 1994.
Oh, yeah. I don't like that. We were alive then.
Mm-hmm.
Things shouldn't be disappearing past a certain point unless it's something nefarious. I don't like that one bit. By the way, not to rain on your parade or anything, but after you tell me these stories, are you going to tell me science-y reasons why this might have happened? Great. Perfect.
Yes.
So happy.
Yes. We're going to get into the science now. Like I said, because I can't confirm a lot of these, I'm not out here to spread conspiracy theories. If you want to know more, read Wikipedia, Google star jelly,
We are not responsible for what comes up if you Google star jelly.
I've Googled star jelly. It's just these weird articles. I didn't come across any porn. So the thing about this star jelly is that all of these stories have they're different descriptions of what it looks like. A couple of them are purple. I think the goo in Washington was white. There's some that's been found in Scotland within the last 10 years, and I think it was white. So it's not just one thing, but in the case of the Frisco, Texas story in 1979, we do know what that one was, because local hero Ron DeLulio, who works at the Fort Worth Museum of Science and History, until very recently works there, took a sample, and they found out that it was this leftover chemical residue from a nearby plant where they reprocess clean batteries, or I didn't really understand what it was, but it's chemical waste. It was chemical waste in her yard. The one in Philadelphia, I have no idea what that one was. Nor do I know what was in Oakville, Washington. According to the Glasgow Naturalist, which is just a publication about earth science and stuff, the sightings that they found in Scotland recently, and then also at a nature reserve in Somerset, are most likely frog spawn. So there's a really nice like scientific article that's like, here are the sightings, here's what it looks like. We found frog eggs nearby. I think the theory is that like when predators eat frogs, when they tear it open, they might tear open their ovaries and the like unfertilized spawn gets out. Yeah. So not less gross, not from space.
Imagine you were keeping that in your fridge for 2 years.
It's unfertilized, like. So I don't actually know how to pronounce this. I don't know if it's live science or live science because I've never heard anyone ever talk about it. There was an incident in 2010 in Virginia where it's just like a bryozoan colony, which is just like, it looks like one animal, but it's actually just like a bunch of it, kind of like how coral all like connect to each other, but they're different animals. So kind of like how coral bunch together and look like one thing, but they're actually a bunch of different animals. It just filters algae out of the water. And the reason it was weird there is like it lives in salt water, not fresh water. But that was an actual living blob. And then Brian Dunning of the Skeptoid podcast has like an episode that I can't listen to because I'm not going to pay for it. But there's an article where he goes through a bunch of different things that it could be. One of them is slime mold, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's just mold that in a certain stage of its development looks real slimy and weird. The thing about that one is it grows very quickly, and then once it reaches the next stage of its life, it kind of dries up, goes away. It could also be blue-green algae or just a bunch of different bacteria and fungi. This idea that it comes from space is really weird. Like, I have no idea where that comes from, except for the fact that, like, they always seem to appear, and there's, like, no evidence of it, like, moving to that location. It's like this fungi just kind of, like, pops up and spreads for a while and then disappears. But, like, that's how fungus is.
Isn't it weird? I'm just the worst person for conspiracy theories because I'm not bothered.
I know, right?
If it did come from space, I'm not bothered. Like, I'm just like, okay, cool. Good for it. I hope you enjoyed space.
Yep.
Like, now you're here with the rest of us. Just because there's so much out in space, and it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, it might be living, but in the same way a leaf is living. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's like aliens, like, or something that's intelligent life. So the idea of, like, again, there's just things that, like, I care quite a bit about, or things that when I hear them, I'm like, well, that's great for it. Like, and this is kind of one of them, is the idea that even if it did come from space, it doesn't necessarily mean that it comes from an intelligent life form in space. It could just mean, like, there's a lot of stuff out there. We haven't, been to all of space, and it could just be the inside gooey part of some asteroid or something. It's just that I don't really know, nor do I want to dig into, if I'm guessing the conspiracy is that it's aliens and that the government's hiding it, but I don't know, and I don't care to know.
I don't know.
But I kind of wonder,
I'm not going to find out,
if, like, even the benign space answer, like when an asteroid falls, like a small baby one that isn't going to, like, dinosaur us, it just, like, exists then. And it's something that came from space. Like, it's something that came, it's a rock, it's a whatever. And again, this is why I was not, like, good at science, because there's a certain level of, I feel like, passion that people have for science that I've just always been like, that's interesting. Like, it does that. Good for it,
Right.
Whereas opposed to, like, ooh.
Well, the thing that you have to keep in mind, and I didn't talk about this a lot because I do want to cover UFOs someday on a different episode, is 1950 especially, like, that's right. Like, that's 1947 was the year we saw a huge spike in people reporting seeing flying saucers. So this is the age when people are just seeing UFOs left and right. And I think it's like in the 70s when we start getting our alien abduction stories, which again, I don't want to get into too much because I think I want to cover that another time. But, like, it kind of all goes into this weird cultural fear we have starting in the 1950s of space, which, I mean, it's not that weird. It makes sense. Like, that's when we decide we're going to start exploring space. And it's also the Cold War, so there's a lot of anxiety all around, and it's got to go. It's like sublimated anxiety about the Cold War. But I think this one's so weird because it's like, I mean, there are lots of weird blobby things. We have a thing called a blobfish, and also jellyfish are kind of blobby. Like, if I saw a weird blob on the ground, my first thought would not be, oh, that came from space. I would be like, that's gross and I don't want to touch it.
Also, I think the ocean is just as terrifying, but we don't seem to be as scared of it. But I think the ocean is just as terrifying as space. Mm-hmm. Like, it's just as unknown. We really haven't explored that much of it. Like, who the hell knows? Like, I think it's just as terrifying. There was another point I wanted to make on what you were saying about the 1940s and 50s being a time when people were seeing. Oh, just a joke. I once saw a thing that was talking about that, like, that year, 1947, was somehow like a time traveler year. So what people are seeing is just all these time traveling tourists, and then it's like, you gotta stop.
That's amazing. 1947, I think, was also the year Roswell happened. So we got Roswell, and we got, like, the first, like, really famous, like, report of seeing a flying saucer that year. So then 1950, these cops see this weird blobby thing. Nor do I really care that much. It doesn't seem, like, honestly, that interesting to me. Like, this was my story, and I really wanted to do it, but when you really dig into it, it's really boring.
I think this is definitely, at one point we were kind of talking at what was better, and last week it was kind of like they're kind of the same story. Like, the movie just had a finer point at the end as opposed to just keep kind of going. But this, I think the movie definitely did better with, like, an idea of something that it's like, ooh, there might be something. Like, I think the movie did really well with that. And I'd be interested to read more if people were genuinely terrified of the Blob.
Yeah, no, I didn't
like,
think about that.
How scared were people of that movie? Like, I'm interested to see that. But again, another week and something story that was not really that much of a bummer. But what about you, Rachel? What else isn't a bummer?
What else is not a bummer? I'm going to rephrase that because that's not a sentence. But a thing that's not a bummer is maybe 2 weeks ago, when I was taking my dog out right before bed, I heard an owl. And I have never heard an owl wild before. And I did some research instead of going to sleep, and it was a great horned owl. And I have not seen it since or heard it since, but I know that an owl lives near me. And that's very exciting.
I like that. I like nature.
Yeah.
I guess I'm going to say mine, even though it's probably not going to be relevant when this airs. But we're on the cusp of spring, and I love spring. I love spring and I love fall. Fall's my favorite season. But I love spring. And so I'm really excited. We're at that point where when I'm walking, I can see the little greens starting to poke through. And I've always loved that. My mom planted tulips when I was growing up. And so that would kind of be the call of we're entering spring. And I grew up in Wisconsin, which meant there was always a time where they popped up and then got their ass kicked by a final snow. But it's still kind of heralded spring. So yes. That's to me, just to give you an idea when we're taping this. And so a really exciting thing next week will be our season finale. Yes, it's 13 episodes. Obviously, we saw our opportunity. We took it.
Oh, yeah.
And for our season finales, for our 13th episodes, we're doing something a little different, there'll be something kind of a little twist on them each time. So for our 13th episode, we are doing
the It-stravaganza, which means we're covering all the movies.
We're covering semi the book because
yes.
Rachel's read it. I have no interest in reading it. Send tweets. I don't care.
I was going to say also the novel a little bit because I'm a pretentious asshole. I'm so sorry. I don't know. I can't change now. It's too late.
I mean, I stick with mine too. I'm not going to read it. But
no, don't.
We are going to cover both movies in the sense of talking about both of them, comparing them, talking about that, and then both of us will be doing a little bit afterwards with the real side of it. So this is something for our 13th, we're choosing things that either have like a really extensive history or extensive trilogy, series, impact. And obviously there's a lot of things we've already done that could be explained that way, but like we're just pulling them out, deciding which one. And it's had a big impact for both of us. So we're excited for this. And thank you for sticking with us. And next week will be the finale. All right. And we will talk to you all then. Bye.
Goodbye.